1995, his opinion was these flaps are the only true way of restoring hair to bald areas. Then I did a dermatology rotation in the same university. And there, they were doing 4mm punches in the back of the head, in the occipital area. And taking those 4mm punches and making 4mm defects up front and just putting them in. So two different ways of treating. One giving a doll's head appearance, which is the dermatology department, and the other one giving a very contorted, very unnatural look. You know, all of a sudden going from no hair to a very dense hair. And since then, we've been on a journey. And the journey started, like we said, the 4mm punch. Then we went to follicular unit transplantation. And what that entails was essentially what you see, taking a strip of skin and dicing it down into individual hairs, into micrografts and mini grafts, grafts of 1 hair, 2 hairs, 3 hairs, or even more. And the problem with that is, and we'll see some photos, are the footprints left behind. The donor area, there's a big morbidity that is involved with taking a big strip of skin. So then came follicular unit extraction. So let's just go in the back of the scalp, in the occipital region, where that hair is of a different genetic makeup, and it is not under the control of, it is not sensitive to dihydrotestosterone, where it will not go through what's called miniaturization and thinning. Well, let's just get it right there with a very tiny 1mm punch, not the 4mm punches of the 90s. And that's revolutionized what we're doing today. And what we're doing today now is only improving the FUE technique. With the FUE technique, we can now, with a handheld device, go and harvest those, or as we'll go and discuss later, we'll use a robot made by the same people who have developed the Da Vinci. And it's amazing. I'm kind of glad that they chose hair transplantation, but this is a humongous robot, and its only job is to punch out a hair graft. So, just as a review, you know, initially, that's what would be left on the back of the scalp. These essentially this checkerboard effect. You would not be able to grow your hair too short. You have to grow it longer. We moved away from that and realized in the 90s, when I was in derm, this was before therapy, effective therapy for HIV. So there was a huge fear factor because it was a bloody procedure, a tremendously bloody procedure. Then we went to the strip technique, and these are the after effects. And that is not desirable to men who want to leave the back of their hair short. And then follicular unit extraction, which is essentially, it's almost impossible to tell where the hair was harvested. There's a whole team that you see. It's not just one person. In the 90s, it was the doctor, like when the 4mm punch technique, it was the doctor himself, and we do maybe, let's do 50 punches today or 20 punches today. You come back in about a month or two and we'll do some more. But now we're doing thousands of grafts in one setting. And it is a whole team that's involved in prepping these grafts. If we're doing a strip technique of essentially preparing the micrografts and mini grafts. And so it's a big to-do. And here we are numbing up the posterior scalp, ready to do a strip excision. And this is what it looks like. You know, you're essentially going right down to fat. You're taking a strip and you're essentially slicing it through and creating micrografts and individual grafts. What's the problem with this? Other than the fact that you're just giving someone a scar, it takes a rather long time to heal from an occipital horizontal scar. Why? It's under tremendous tension with any neck flexion. But when the technician is separating the different grafts, there is a lot of peripheral damage. So you're going after one graft, it's very likely you will transect an adjacent graft. And when you transect that, you're going to put that in a pile and a heap that's going to be thrown away. You will not use that. So you've lost, in the greater equation, you've lost a lot of grafts. And a lot of guys don't like that. A lot of guys don't want that. They want to cut their hair that way. And in fact, we get people where we take hair. I usually don't like to take hair from the back of the scalp and put it in the scar. I think it's a waste. If I'm going to harvest hair from the back, I want it up front. But we might take beard hair and just punch a few of those and fill that defect. Look at this. That's a defect. That takes a major healing from. And we are truly moving away from this. With the hand punches, they're great. They're fantastic. There's a huge learning curve, and you're going to see a lot more transection when you're using a 1 millimeter punch to get a hair. Different types of hairs. For instance, people who might have more curly hair are going to be more challenging. So there's a learning curve. And so don't expect to start this and bam, do a 3,000 case that first day. Start small. But you see the defects that are left from the punch. I mean, they're almost indistinguishable from adjacent tissue. And this is the kind of grafts they give you. That's an FUE. And if you want individual grafts, your technicians will separate these into individual grafts. We usually want a cuff of fat around it. We like chubby grafts over skeletonized grafts. Why? One of the worst things, and these can be board questions, especially if you're derm, is desiccation is the worst thing for hair graft. So we do not want these to dry. Always keep them moist, and if they have a cuff of fat, cuff of tissue, much less susceptible to ambient desiccation. And this is, you know, the gist of it essentially. You know, you're using a tool, a punch tool, going after individual grafts. These are sharp tools. You're harvesting them individually. This takes many hours. You start like in the morning and you leave well into the late afternoon, maybe early evening. And then you put it in. And so this is the gist. And here is someone who's had an FUE technique. And this is a very small FUE technique. And then you create what's called a layering. So you didn't buzz cut the back of the hair completely. You just did a little section, and then you just combed over He did the comb over. Hair grows about 1 centimeter or so a month, and soon it will not be perceptible. We'll see some pictures of how it looks, how the donor area looks in the subsequent weeks. Here's a person who had an FUT, essentially a strip technique, and an FUE technique. And look at the FUE technique. It looks pretty much like he has a little rash or some sort. And while the FUE are harvested and taken, but the scar from the FUT, that's with him for life. So thus started the 21st century in 2001 or so, and taking this punch blade and putting it in the hands of a robot. So a robot that has an algorithm that's and a laser light that can help it detect the trajectory of hair, essentially the thickness of dermis, indicating how deep it needs to send a sharp punch, and then the depth of subcutaneous tissue, how far it needs to send a dull punch to core this out. And it comes with what's called a hair studio. You can essentially simulate for the patient what you are envisioning. This simulation, once agreed upon by the patient, you can enter into the robot. So the day of, that's the recipient sites are made according to what was agreed upon at the same angle. And this is what it looks like. I mean, it's essentially harvesting. It's made only to harvest from the back of the scalp. This is the screen that's shot up. You're seeing individual grafts here, that are harvested. You're seeing the angle at which the blade is hitting the scalp. You're seeing how deep your undermining dull blade goes in, and you're seeing how deep your sharp cutting blade goes in. And you're also seeing, and you can't tell what the force by which this blade enters. So if the force is above a certain point, you know you need to make your sharp go in a little deeper. And ask any questions, and I don't know if, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, obviously not very knowledgeable about this, but is this only for male problems, or things like that, using inflammatory disorders?
So inflammatory disorders, you're not gonna, so transplantation is not a good tool for inflammatory disorders. So if you have, for instance, lichen planopilaris, if you have, for instance, alopecia areata, you do not want to do hair transplantation, because those, if you look at this as soil or tree problem, tree being the hair, soil being the recipient, the scalp, the inflammatory problem, the issues, it's a soil issue. So if you take any hair and put it in that soil, it's going to be rejected. So you must control that inflammation. Well, if it's a burnt out one, that's different. Then that's different. Then it's no longer, and there are certain publications showing efficacy of transplantation for alopecia areata that has burned out, that just refuses to budge. It's not active. Well, and there are publications out there showing it works. But for scar, for instance. For advancing, for instance, we talked about facial thirds. If your upper third, one way upper thirds are addressed, or maybe pretracheal forehead lift or so. Well, this is another way. Advance the hairline down, and now you have a more balanced look. Again, kind of simulating patients, get an idea of what they're gonna get. Too often, I've been doing hair for about 14 years, and I've seen so many remorseful patients who've gone through it and come in looking for another doctor. Oh my God, what have I done? You know, the more you can spell it out, the more you can predict for the patient, I think you'll have a better experience. Again, here we go. We identify the area, and this is essentially recipient site making, and this is 12 days post-surgery. I mean, it doesn't look like he's had anything done really, but. And the beauty of it is thousands of people, actually millions of people have been now treated by this technique. Papers show it has a very low transection rate. This paper, over 90,000 hair follicles, they had an 8% transection rate. I'll tell you, the other day I did 3,000 cases. We didn't even have a single transection. The day before we did 3,000. We had like 6 transections, and the beauty of this is the transection, when you have a transection, it's not like the strip technique when you have a transection and you throw it away. Here, you're taking the top layer of the hair follicle, but the bulb, the root, is still in the patient's scalp, in the back of the scalp, so it will regrow. The dermal papilla, which is very key for hair growth, it is still in place. It will grow. So you do not have an overall loss, 4.9%, over 95% take rate. And so again, paper after paper shows very low transection rates, and that's a big seller to this. Why? Because this robot does not tie. And here's what it can look like. This is essentially a day after the surgery, cleaning up all the dry blood and all. And this is about a week. So patients are rather happy, as opposed to when you have a big strip here and stitches and whatnot. And here you go. Essentially before, 10 days after, before, 3 months after. And here you go. This is about 2,000 hairs being transplanted. It takes about, I always tell patients it'll take a year. As soon as you do anything to hair, it'll go into a resting phase. Any resting phase on the scalp is a minimum of 4 to 6 months. So don't expect anything in 4 to 6 months. But even the hairs that start coming in, they're going to first be a little finer, and then they become more robust. So I always say this is a year-long endeavor. Again, this is about 2,500, and this is 2 years. This is about 3,000. 3,000. 2,500. We're doing large numbers. We're doing large numbers. So this is a short talk, but ultimately, but just as a primer, hair transplantations evolved immensely. Yeah, I'm sorry.
What does it look like
In 5 years?
Yeah.
Well.
5 to 10 is the real long term.
So that hair that's transplanted has the biology that it has. It's like what the hair would look in the back of the scalp. Now the question is, have they thinned further? I did in no way change their DNA. So if someone thinks they're going to do monotherapy, and this is, for now on, they're going to be like John Travolta from the 80s, not now, but that's unrealistic. Like anything, you got to manage it. So, for instance, I like people to be on something like minoxidil. You know, I trained at U of I, and Virginia Fiedler invented 5% Rogaine. So we had intense, we had a lot of experience with that drug. No surgery is going to give me thicker hair. So, if you think just surgery is going to handle this, you're not going to be happy in 5 years maybe. So you got to manage it like anything. But these hairs will be there. The robotic system, I think it's a promising system. If I didn't, I wouldn't talk about it really. It reduces surgeon fatigue immensely and gives you more consistent products. I tell patients, if you're having, we're essentially standardizing this procedure. Half of the procedure, graft procurement, has been standardized. So whether you're having it here in Los Angeles, New York, wherever, you're kind of getting the same experience, which is amazing, isn't it? And the donor area is virtually undetectable. So I'm an advocate of this.
You're still doing the implantation yourself?
The implantation is being done by the human being. And that is technicians. That's technician driven. These are top-notch technicians. They eat, drink, and sleep this. They're phenomenal, and they're usually independent contractors that float around looking. This is, so you want top-notch, because ultimately people remember you. So people are like, what do you do in this? I'm like, I'm the quality control guy. That's my job. I'm in there plucking, I'll go in there, pop out grafts, look at them, yeah, it's good, let's keep this setting going, like that. But really, it's automated.
What's the cost to a patient to get it done?
So it depends, again, what city you're in. It's per graft. It's going to be $6 to $10 a graft to do this. And the question is, how much hair do I need? And for my rule of thumb is to look at an area that is devoid of total hair and trying to mimic a hair-bearing scalp, I need about 350 hairs a square inch. So I pretty much take something that's a square inch and I'm like 1 square inch, 2 square. This is how I literally show them. They're like, well, can I just spend 1,000? I'm like, fine, then let's do this. Let's just do these 2 areas. But it's,
So those pictures with like 2,000 hairs, that's like $20,000 almost to do that.
It's a big investment.
Yeah.
It's a huge, but it's always been a big investment. It's a very laborious,
Yeah.
It's not just me. It's a whole team. It's like people are all over the place. It's a team.
How much is the laser?
So the device is about $250,000, $300,000, and you pay each time it punches. So they sell you the razor, and they make money on the blades. Is essentially what they're doing.
So you rent the machine?
You buy the machine, but you have a licensing because it's connected to the internet. And I'll tell you, that will be your least cost. The majority of your cost is going to be marketing, because this is very, very competitive. You're going up against national chain. But the value, the difference between you and the national chains is they know your name. They're like, I went to Bosley. Well, Dr. Bosley never does the surgery on you. So, it's like, thank you, Bosley, is their commercials. Patients are saying, but you never even saw Dr. Bosley.